It would help if I turned my microphone on for once, right? How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. My name is Sean Robinson, as you guys have known from the last number of weeks with our LUMIX Live sessions. I want to welcome everyone and hope you're all doing well out there. If you are new to this style event, or if this is the first time you're tuning in with us, this is a weekly event that we hold to have a conversation with all of you. We typically have guests or photographers, videographers, other members of the US LUMIX team, the global LUMIX team on board here to kind of answer questions, show you guys some tips and tricks about the cameras, take your feedback. You guys are an invaluable part of the community by providing your feedback and your comments in the chat while we're on these streams. With that, if you're new to this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon on our LUMIX Cameras channel. It greatly helps us to build this platform and continue to deliver this kind of content on a weekly basis to everybody. If you're returning to this, make sure to hit the like buttons. That always helps us. That always makes the channel, help show better in the overall platform for YouTube. And let's see, a couple other things here. This is going to be a slightly different platform than what we've normally been running. Most of the time, our LUMIX Lives, like I said, have guests involved, and we have conversations about a very specific topic. This week is actually totally driven by questions and comments we've received from the community. So from you guys, from our conversations on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and all the different platforms all over. So we're going to be taking time to actually go over some of the more common things that people ask us questions about, show you guys some different functionality that we do with the cameras, explain some features, and take questions live during this stream. Now, if you want to ask us a question during this broadcast, make sure to tag @LUMIX Cameras in your question. So actually type the @ LUMIX Cameras. It should pop up as an auto fill for YouTube. This way we can actually see the questions on my end. I can answer them. Our team that's monitoring the chat as well can also jump in for answers that maybe we don't get to on the chat here, because as you can see already, if you scroll through some of these things, there's a ton of questions. We're probably not going to get to every single one of them, even though I think a lot of the questions are pretty duplicate or variants of the same. So I want to basically jump right into a couple of the questions that we've had, and actually some of the questions that I've seen come up in the chat so far. So to start with, this is not a product announcement. There are no product announcements during this stream. So if that's what you came for, maybe hang around. We've got some other really cool things to talk about today. When it comes to some of the other topics, obviously we know you guys have a lot of the same questions that have been coming up over the number of weeks that we've been doing these. I won't always have a good answer for you. I won't always have an answer for you. So if I don't get to your question, or it's an answer that maybe you're not happy with, I apologize, but that's just kind of how it goes. I don't have all of the answers. I do work with a lot of our teams, but unfortunately, we just don't always have answers that we can kick out. So with that, I want to jump into probably one of the more common questions we've received through a number of our different platforms. Like we had said a couple of weeks ago, we put out a call to the community to submit questions through YouTube. We ended up getting actually a bunch of questions through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. So we broadened the platform of where we're accepting the questions. And we're going to continue this kind of activity. My goal is to do something like this the last week of every month, ideally, so that we can round out the conversations that we have. Obviously give you guys a bunch of technical information, demonstrations on products, but then also tie it back to the things that we have maybe missed that you guys are looking for. So one of the big questions that we've always gotten is actually related to working with ProRes RAW files. Now, as some of you know, as probably actually a lot of you know, based on the names I'm seeing in the chat who are regulars, ProRes RAW was released on the S1H a little while ago, and there was a lot of questions about, how do you actually work with it? What programs work with it? How can you actually leverage this for your workflow? And I have a little bit of a demonstration to kind of give you the rough framework on how to actually work with these files in Final Cut. Now, full disclosure, I am not the best at editing, not the best at color grading or anything like that, but most of the questions we received on it is, okay, I have this file. Now, when I open Final Cut, what do I actually do with it? Like, how do I change ISO? How do I change white balance? What do the LUTs mean? So one of the things I wanted to do is jump over to my MacBook here and actually show you guys a little bit of how you actually get into that file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to connect into my MacBook. If this HDMI cable actually wants to cooperate. And, kind of go through a little bit of this walkthrough. Again, to show you the basic ways of how you actually go into importing this footage and getting it in with the platform. So we should have here, hey, there it is. All right, so what you'll see here is this is my MacBook, and if you've worked with HDR footage, you've worked with ProRes RAW or any of these other platforms, this may seem pretty normal to you, this interface. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to completely start this from scratch. So if you've never actually utilized it, which is where the question primarily came from, is I've never actually done this, how do I actually set up Final Cut? Since right now it is the strongest platform to actually work with ProRes RAW files. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to create a new library. So we're going to create new, and I'm going to do raw test. And we have our project here. The main thing that you're going to want to do to really maximize what you can get out of this camera is actually by going into the library properties, go into modify, change this to wide gamut HDR, and click change. This means that you're actually going to be able to take full advantage of the full dynamic range, the actual capabilities of output for this footage. Now, this is not going to be 100% the way everybody needs to work. But in this case, again, this is how we've actually seen a lot of people asking us how to just basically start working with it. So from here, you're going to import footage, and I'm going to input, I'll import the Jeep footage that I have here. The next thing you're going to notice is that now I can click in here and look at my the Jeep footage here, which is coming in as raw to log conversion. So it's taking that raw footage and it's converting it to Panasonic Vlog, and it by default automatically applies the Panasonic Vlog LUT to it. Now you can come in here and you can disable these and just look at the log footage. You can disable the raw to log conversion and just look at the raw footage. But what I'm going to do here, just to speed up this part of it here, is I'm going to actually leave both of these on. One of the things that you're going to notice is that the color space is obviously not correct with this setup. So you're looking at the RGB parade and it's only going up to 120. So what I do typically is I go in here, change it to Rec 2020 PQ, and you see things fall back in line here. From this point, this is where you're going to have access to your ISO. So I can come in here and see that I shot this piece of footage at 4000 ISO on the S1H. You can see that the color temperature was set to 5500 Kelvin. And within this, I can now use this slider and actually change the legitimate white balance for these. So those of you that have worked with RAW, this isn't anything really new. A lot of you guys have already been working with this. You're fairly comfortable with it. But this was the big improvement for ProRes RAW that really solidified it as an actual RAW file instead of what some were coining as kind of like a super log file. So you actually have white balance control. If I had a grade card here, you'd be able to see the actual change. And I'm going to reset this back to 5500. The other really cool nice thing is that you have the ability to come in here and literally change your ISOs. So this piece was shot at 4000 ISO. If I wanted to come down and say, set this to 1600 ISO, you'll see the image actually does drop down the way it should. You can drop all the way down to 50 ISO if you wanted to. Now, this is where the second part of the question that we've been getting about ProRes RAW actually comes into play. We mentioned this a little bit on one of our previous streams about, when you're working with a camera like the S1H that has a true dual native ISO circuit system, what ISOs are best to shoot at. And I'm going to cover that actually on the camera, but I want to give everyone a little bit of a kind of background on this. So when you're looking at a dual native ISO circuit system like the S1H, like the VariCam, that means that you have two native ISOs. So on the S1H in Vlog, which is in ProRes RAW, when you're sending that RAW data out, you're at either 640 or at 4000 ISO. What that means is that when you're setting it at those particular numbers, you're going to get the maximum amount of dynamic range with the minimal amount of noise at that circuit. So that means that you're going to be able to get the most latitude. Now, there are a lot of times where you may not be shooting at one of the other of those ISOs. You could be metering everything out and you're looking at about 3200 ISO or 2500 ISO, something in those ranges. Now, the common thing and the common comments that we got and the questions we got was, well, which would be better? Just setting the camera to 3200 ISO while using the auto switch for dual native, or setting it to 6400 gaining up, or setting it to 4000 and gaining down to get to that 3200. And I'm using 32 as the most common that we've been asked about. And the fact is, when you're working with this in RAW and you know that you're going to be going in for post to correct color, to bring in, really edit it for your final product, you want to look at it and say, okay, how high in each of those circuits am I going? So if you're already set up and you have the camera in auto and you go up to 3200 ISO, it's actually going to be better for you to just change the camera over to the high circuit and shoot it at 4000 if you're shooting in ProRes RAW. What that's going to give you is the ability to go into Final Cut like we were just looking at, go into that ISO slider, and then just bump it down to 3200 and work from there. It will give you a much cleaner looking footage than if you just shot it at 3200 ISO. And the reason for that is when you switch the circuitry over, which is the big advantage of the S1H over pretty much any camera that I understand in the consumer space that implements some style of this technology, is that you have control of which circuit you want to use. So when you're in 4000 and you're pulling your ISO down to 3200, you are giving up a little bit of dynamic range for a cleaner looking image. It's the same thing if you're a photographer and you know that you shoot at extended ISOs on the lower range. The same can be said for 640. If your camera's telling you that you want to shoot at lower ISOs, it's not as big of a deal because your base ISO at 640 in auto, when you're starting this, it's going to be always starting at 640 anyway. So gaining down in camera is going to be similar. But that means that you're going to get the most out of the camera. So if you set it at 4000 when you know that you're up in that 1600 to 4000 range, or I think it's actually 2500 to 3200 for the extendeds, you're going to have a much better file to work with. There are also a ton of other tools that are actually built into the S1H that will help, kind of guide you in the exposure for those particular files. So I want to jump back over here to the MacBook and go to the second part, or the third part, realistically, of this question that we get. So this clip was shot in the 5888 by 3312. So that's the 5.9K RAW that we record. Now, everything being set in here, if I were to just do a new project, leave the settings to auto, and I'll just change this to Jeep. If I could spell Jeep, that would be great. Jeep test. So I have my project set up. Now, if I were to drag this down here as that 5.9K file, you'll see it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't understand what 5.9K is because by default, it's trying to find 4690 by 3122 is a 4K RAW. If you go up to 5K, it's 5120. If you go up any higher, then you're jumping right up to 8K. So what I'll do is I'll go custom, and then you'll see it auto-populates to 5888 by 3312, It's 24p footage. I'm leaving this as ProRes RAW 422 or ProRes 422, and I'm leaving my wide gamut HDR to Rec 2020 PQ. Once I click OK, the footage populates in and you can start working with it and you're fine. So from there, that's where you can go in, start doing your color edits, start changing around, editing the exposure to how you want it. So if I wanted to bring these highlights down to a little over 1,000, around 1,000 nits, if I want to bring my shadows up a little bit so that I'm really, not crushing too much into the shadow area there. If I want to bring my midtones down, whatever. So like I said, I'm not the best at actually editing footage to make it look professional. That part I leave up to all of you guys. Wow, that microphone just got really hot. So from here, the fourth question that we typically get is, okay, so now I have this, how do I actually export out an HDR file? Like, I want to actually be able to save this and play it on my television or play it on my mobile phone or something like that to send it to a client. So the next thing that you're typically going to do, in this case, at least this is, again, how I work, not necessarily how you're going to work. That's up to everyone's individual workflow, is you're going to want to have compressor, and we're going to send this as a new batch. So compressor is going to open, and one of the things that I like to mention with this as well is that I'm doing this on an i5 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. So nothing really crazy in spec, nothing really, high-end in performance. It's a good computer, but it's a fairly basic-ish entry-level computer. So what I have here is I have an actual setup that is defaulted for sending out HDR content. So I'll go into video here. You'll see that I have 3840 by 2160 because a lot of times if you're mixing the actual frame size on the platform that you want to actually send this to, you may notice that the host device or the television or whatever may not actually be able to view it. It may tell you that it's unable to see it. And that can happen if it's in 17:9 or if it's out of the normal setup. So the easiest way for someone to do this, I usually say just go frame size, set it to actual UHD 4K. I have the cropping set here so that it's 16:9 as well. But the important thing that you want to look at is you want to go into your color space and you want to make sure that you're sending it out as Rec 2020. In this case, I'm doing Rec 2020 PQ. And you want to make sure that you're sending it as HEVC. So it's still an MP4 file, but it's the better compression. It's the newer format. When you take this, this actual setup, I'll drag this onto my Jeep test file. Then I'll go to my locations and say, okay, I want to just send this out to my desktop. Now you're basically set to send this out and start the batch. So this is the part where you'll notice, and I'll actually turn the picture-in-picture on. This is the part where you'll notice that depending on the computer you have, depending on what you're working on, this is where it could take much longer. It could be much faster to do this. It all just depends on the platform. These i5s are okay. This computer does all right at processing and getting all this content out. You can see for this rather short clip, it's definitely going to take a while to encode HEVC. But once you have that, you can just kick this file out. It's HDR ready. That means I can put it onto a thumb drive, put it into a TV, and actually view this footage. Or I can load it up to something like YouTube. It's going to trigger it properly and actually give you that real content the way it's supposed to look. So now, like I said, we went through that. I'm going to actually plug in my other camera here, and we'll jump to the next section. In the meantime, I'm going to look and see what we have question-wise here. Let's see. The first one I see here from Alan, how do I use a cable release on the LUMIX G9? So there's a couple different things that you can do to actually be able to do a cable release for your G9. The LUMIX camera, particularly the G9, does actually allow you to use the LUMIX Sync app on iOS and Android. That will give you the ability to send your Bluetooth connection over so that you can trigger both shutter and video. It's something I use a lot actually for astrophotography because it actually allows me to set a bulb exposure and let it run. The other option you can get is the G9 does have just a remote port on it, if I remember correctly. Yeah, does have just a remote port. It's a micro or a 2.5 millimeter input, and that should work for you as well. Let's see here. What other questions we've got? Just as a reminder, if you guys have questions, a lot of you are doing this already. Make sure to tag at LUMIX cameras so that I can see it, so that Jack can see them in the chat as well, so that we can get to your guys' questions. Let's see. We have a couple of questions about the S5 shipping. You guys should be seeing those cameras soon. I believe by the end of the month, you should actually start seeing them. So I know that was a little different. We don't have global delivery dates. We only have, at least for our region, we only know when the US cameras are going to start shipping. So you guys should see them by the end of the month. Let's see here. Question from Christopher. Are you planning a firmware update for the GH series for the G9, for the GH series and the G9 that will allow live compositing? I don't know if there is any plan to do that, but know that your comments and stuff like that are being sent over to our teams. I personally would love to see it in other cameras. It is definitely an awesome feature in the S5. Let's see here. What other questions we got? Testing 05, put a battery grip on it, increase the image stabilization overall. Hi, all right, this one's from Les. Hi, I am testing a G95. If I put a battery grip on it, would that increase image stabilization overall, even with a non-stabilized lens to get closer to that of the G9? So this is an interesting one. Stabilization is going to come, in my view, in three kind of parts. So there's three things that'll affect it. Obviously, the in-camera stabilization system. Is it a magnetic? Is it a mechanical? Is it electronic? Whatever platform it is there. The G95 is magnetic and it is 5-axis, so it's on the better end of the spectrum. The second part is typically your ability to typically handhold without stabilization. If you're someone who can handhold the traditional rules for stabilization, so that would be 1 over the focal length or 1 over the field of view focal length, when we look at Micro Four Thirds, you're going to have a much better time stabilizing a camera with a stabilizer. The third part actually comes down to the weight of the camera and the layout. So where's my other camera here? Here it is. So the first things that we typically end up talking to a lot of customers about is when they're looking to stabilize, and I actually have a G95 right here. Don't shoot like this. Don't shoot with the camera away from your body. Obviously, shoot with the camera to your face. That will increase the number of contact points. And this is the same for video, too. With mirrorless, you have that ability. It can come in clutch in a number of situations where maybe you don't have access to a gimbal or your arms aren't as steady out like this. So make sure you've got your 3 points there. The other thing is a battery grip. I'm always a big proponent of battery grips for a more stable platform. If you're using longer lenses, having the camera weighted properly and balanced properly will drastically increase your ability to handhold longer shots. Wide-angle lenses, it's not as critical, but it ends up actually being pretty useful for longer frame shooting. So getting the grip can help, but I would test the first couple things first. Are you making sure that you're in the right platform? How good are you without any stabilization or any optical stabilization or sensor stabilization? Sorry, as I just keep smacking my microphone. Those will all kind of guide you as to whether or not, if you're finding that you're more running into issues where the camera's leaning forward, then a grip's going to help because it's going to help balance the camera back. Hopefully that helps address some of your question there. Let's see here. From Red, any plans to upgrade video specs of the S1 with a future firmware update? Something like the S5 has. Unfortunately, I have no additional information other than what we've talked about and announced with the S5, that the S1, S1R, and S1H are getting the autofocus improvements from the S5 into those cameras. Stay tuned and make sure you're keeping up to date with channels like this, like our Instagram, our YouTube, our Facebook, the global channels. Keep an ear to those. If anything changes, that's where you'd hear it. You wouldn't necessarily hear it from me on this channel. Let's see here. As a reminder again, for those that do have questions, make sure to be tagging at LUMIX cameras for us to get your questions here. Let's see here. Jack is messaging me that we've got a couple questions here. Infinite. Trying to see where... Looks like we've got some of these questions being answered in chat. Let's see. Infinite, where can I get Vlog for a GH5? Check, if you're based in the U.S., check the U.S. retailers. So any of the U.S. photo specialty stores, you're more than likely able to get it from any of them. They should have inventory of it, I think. Let's see here. Helen, is there a preview for aperture on a G9? I have only seen it in manual mode. There is. So what you're looking for is constant preview is one of the things you can do. If you set constant preview on, that will mimic the actual exposure changing. So when you stop your lens down, it's physically going to stop the lens down. So you'll actually see the darker image or the properly exposed image if you've got shutter speed set right. Or even if you're in aperture priority, it will adjust the actual exposures to show you on screen what the actual image is, which the byproduct of that is you're getting aperture preview. The one thing there is that it is tied with shutter speed as well for constant preview. So if it's, say, f8 and a 10-second exposure, the screen will be updating every 10 seconds. It's giving you an actual preview of your image. As a standalone aperture depth of field preview like we used to have on film cameras, I don't think there's anything specifically about that in the systems, but we can definitely bring that up to our team. Let's see, what other questions we got before I jump to the next kind of known question that we've received in here. Are there any, let's see here. Medium Man, is there any news on a release of a GH6 camera? Is Panasonic actively working to expand Micro Four Thirds platform, or are R&D we're going full frame? No comment on the release of any potential cameras. We don't have that information. We have numerous times reiterated our commitment to Micro Four Thirds. The system is, kind of the cornerstone of the LUMIX brand. Full frame is that area where we get to experiment and push with newer technologies into areas where Micro Four Thirds may not be the best option for some of those areas. So just like I said with the other question as well, keep your ear and eyes to these different platforms, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, any of the platforms that we're using. And that's where you're going to hear the most up-to-date official information. Otherwise, unfortunately, I don't have any update for you there on that one. Let's see here. Let's see. AG, this is actually a really good question because we do actually get this question often. Why are high-resolution cameras like the S1R I'm going to say not necessarily good for recording video? There's two kinds of thoughts on this, and it depends on the platform that you're working in. High-resolution cameras can give you the ability to record higher resolution video. Like the S1R, it is getting a 5K upgrade in firmware coming. We did announce that with the S5. Where you're going to see some differences is really in the use applications for some of these cameras. Larger sensor, for any given sensor size with an increase in resolution, you're going to see a difference in how those cameras produce or how those cameras process the image coming off for noise and dynamic range, things like that. When you start looking at ultra high resolution cameras, typically you're noticing that across the board, they typically don't have the same good dynamic range that you find in a camera like the S1H. And that's typically because the photo sites are smaller. So you run into some issues with just how much dynamic range you can capture based on the size of a photo site. In other cases, they can be a big benefit, actually. Higher resolution sensors mean higher resolution video. So if you're someone working in a studio where you have full control over your lighting, if you're a filmmaker and you can actually control the lighting to be the primary control for your exposure, then high resolution cameras that typically exhibit higher noise can be mitigated by better lighting. It really goes into more of the kind of craft of filmmaking versus necessarily the technology that you have there. You have a lot of flexibility between them. You typically do also get the ability in higher resolution cameras, like again, the S1H does have the ability because it can do 6K. You do have still the ability to do 6K open gate on that camera, but you also get a better looking 4K because you're taking a 6K image and downsampling it to 4K. So there's some advantages there. I wouldn't say it's as cut and dry saying that an S1R isn't good for video recording. It's great. This camera, I record actually a decent amount of video with my S1R because I get pretty much full frame-ish 60p 4K out of it because it's got that really fast readout full frame sensor, and it's still the same platform as the S1, S1H. Well, close to the S1H. Obviously, the S1H has a fan. So let me jump into the continuing with that ProRes RAW kind of conversation here. So let's see here. Okay. So as you can see, sorry for the cables floating everywhere. Had to find a way to reorganize my desk and kind of set things up so that it's maybe a little bit cleaner for this presentation. But when we were talking about a second ago, and I'm just going to mute this for a second. When we were talking a little bit ago about, the tools that the S1H has to actually help with your video creation, there's a lot that ends up getting overlooked. And some of the questions that we had, again, from a number of users out there were, could you explain things like luminance spot meter? What does it do? How do you actually use it? And that basically, if you can see the bottom of the camera here, you'll see what luminance spot meter is designed to do is basically tell you when you're working in a log format with the S1H, it's going to give you an actual readout in stops. So you're going to get either a negative number, a 0, or a positive number. Now, if you've been following along and you've seen everything about how the dynamic range is on the S1H, you'll know that you get about 8 stops under middle gray and about 6+ stops over middle gray. So what this tool is designed to give you is the ability to actually go in, set your shot up with a gray card, so I can hold a gray card up, put this little box that's right here, it's highlighted, not the focus box, but the actual little tiny box, put that on my gray card and calibrate that so that it's 0 at the gray card under the lighting conditions where my subject's going to be for filming. When that's set at 0, I can then go through and say, well, if I want to take this and go, this will be a little difficult because the shot I have set up here doesn't really have too much dynamic range in it, clearly. Basically what it means is I can put this into the deepest, darkest shadow area that I see, which in this case, if I go all the way down into this corner, is negative 6.9 stops underexposed. So that's under middle gray. So I know now that this image is going to have about 7 stops under middle gray shooting in log. But I can also take this and go up to my highlight point and say, well, that highlight point is 0.7 stops over. So what this tool allows you to do is be able to come in here and adjust things like your exposure. And I'm going to do this with ISO, even though I'm at 4,000, just to show you guys what actually changes. So if I jump this camera up to 20,000 ISO, you'll see that that highlight point has now jumped up to plus 3.4 stops. And the shadowed region, if I can stop hitting my touch bar. And of course, my touch bar is going to be really annoying because I left it on. what you'll see is that as you move through those different points, you're going to be able to actually start seeing, okay, how high can I go in my highlights to expose this image? So that means knowing the curve and knowing how Vlog responds, I can say those highlights are going to be around, say, 7 stops over. Well, I know that means that I'm going to clip maybe about a stop. And I say maybe because we talk about 6+ stops. It's going to depend on your editing and your exposure capabilities. But I also know that now my shadows are actually going to be much more recoverable because they're really only sitting at about maybe 4 stops under. So I can maximize my exposure to make sure that I have more than enough highlight information to pull back, more than enough shadow information to pull up, so that I'm not crushing or clipping anything out of my exposure. The luminance spot meter was something that's actually come from some of the Vericam products that we have, so having it in this camera has been a huge benefit for those that want to actually be able to maximize as much dynamic range as you have. Now, does this mean that it's a replacement for, say, waveform? No. There are so many different tools between waveform, vector scopes for color accuracy. You have, obviously, a histogram for those that want to work with a histogram. You also have the other capabilities like connecting in with the Ninja. So if I'm in with the Ninja, that means that I can be using the on-screen waveform that comes with this tool. I have all the different controls for false color, false color, zebras, everything are also included in this. I have 2 sets of zebras in the S1H that I can work with, so I can set one for my ultra highlights, one for around midtones. So you have all of these different tools to be able to maximize finding your exposure and truly capture as much dynamic range as you can. So if your output is, say, HDR content, you know you've got the dynamic range. If you're working for Rec 709 content, you're cool. You've got everything that you need to be able to map that down into Rec 709. The other thing, while we're looking at the S1H, that we get a ton of questions with, and I know that there are still a ton of questions going around on Facebook about this, that is, so I've attached my Ninja 5 to the S1H, and I can't get it to trigger the Ninja 5. There are a number of videos out there that get it, I'd say about 90% there, but there's typically one piece that's missing for a lot of people. So basically, what you want to do when you set these two things up is there's 2 main things that you want to make sure you have on, and a lot of times the second one is what gets missed in the conversation about it. So I'm going to go into my camera here, go up into my main settings here, scroll down, you'll see that I'm in dual native high ISO. I'm shooting in my, I'm sending raw data out into my Ninja 5. But importantly, you want to make sure you go to timecode. You want to, I leave timecode display on even though I don't use it all the time. But you want to make sure you have HDMI timecode output turned on. This is where you'll actually see a lot of people commenting that, okay, I've done that. Why doesn't it work? But when you start looking at the next step that always gets missed is you have to actually go into your settings and go down. Let's see if I remember actually where it is in this page. Is you have to go to HDMI rec output. Go into this menu and make sure you have HDMI recording control turned on. This is the part that consistently gets missed in a lot of the online videos about how to be triggering the Ninja 5 with the S1H. Once you have that set up, what should happen is when you press the shutter or press the record button, the Ninja 5 is going to record. But if you're still not seeing it, there's one last thing that you may want to check on. Usually this isn't as big of a deal. Usually this is on by default with most people. Is you're going to go into the settings on the Ninja. You want to make sure that your trigger information is coming from the HDMI. And let's just see here, because I've been moving all of this stuff a lot. So you want to make sure that your triggering information is coming in from the HDMI. Trigger is on. with that, you should be perfectly fine to actually be triggering now the information onto the Ninja. So let's see here what the next, let's see if we've got any other questions here before we jump into some of the photography-based questions that I know we've had. Video people, will you implement false colors as an exposure aid? I don't know if false color can be added into the cameras, but we do add those kinds of comments into our teams so that they can, review. Is it something that can be done, and go from there. So I'm going to take that as a suggestion for something to add in, even though you've asked a question about it. Let's see here. Question from Ryan. Could you go over what the difference is between 16 to 255 versus 0 to 255 luminance levels? Yes. We have covered it in past episodes. I've covered it. The rest of my team has covered it in classes we teach around the U.S. for our dealer base. But basically, those are broadcast legal ranges that you want to work with for luminance. So if you look at something like YouTube, as an example, if you send footage up that is set to 0 to 255 as luminance, you're going to see kind of what you're seeing actually now in some cases with the way YouTube compression works and the way their display works. The black levels are crushed because it's brought up to that 16. So that means anything that's exposed below 16, 16 on your waveform is basically crushed out and it's gone. The higher number, the 255 or the brightness, anything over at 255 means that is pure white on an 8-bit scale. So anything at 255 would show up as pure white. There's no information. It's just white light. When you go down into, say, 235, that means that you're telling the camera that 235 is white. Anything above that is, I believe it's called super white. Probably wrong on that. But anything over that is, you know that you're going to be clipping that depending on the platform that you're sending it to. So I believe basically it's going to be 16 to 235 is a pretty safe range to work with if you know that you're going to broadcast. I know that that's what I typically use when I'm sending something into YouTube. So I don't get this whole beautiful piece done, send it up to YouTube, and then realize all of a sudden my highlights are totally clipped and my shadows are totally crushed. You have a couple different flexibilities with that. As far as how that stuff actually works when it comes to editors and recorders and all of those different things, that's an entirely different conversation, but that's the rough idea of it. And when you look at 10-bit, it's just larger numbers, but the same concept. Look at the full range versus the condensed range to kind of get your area there. Let's see here. Another question. Let's see. LUMIX from FC252. Is it possible to show large red box when recording video instead of a small blinking red dot on the G9? Unfortunately, at this time, no. The red frame recording indicator is on the S5, the S1H. I don't know if that's something that's going to or can be brought back to the other cameras. But like all the other things, we take these comments, these questions, and we feed them over to our team as feedback for the products. Let's see here. Cliff, S1H has a gyroscope. Does it save the metadata in the video file for potential post-stabilization? Honestly, I have no idea. I'm going to say I don't think so, but I don't know. So, sorry. Let's see, Les. Answer questions. I always test between LUMIX cameras now. Oh, cool. Hey, yeah, you're welcome for answering your question. Let's see. Oh, and as Jack is commenting in there too, the G100 also has the red frame record in there. Let's see. Any other questions we got in here before I jump over to a couple of the photo things before we go too far along? MPG. Any thoughts into doing a filterless camera for astrophotography or astro video? It would be great to capture IR and UV without modifying the camera. To my knowledge, no. I don't think there's any look into doing something like that. I don't want to speak on, obviously if there's always possibilities of things, but not that I'm aware of. I know that one of the cameras I sent out to one of the companies on the West Coast to have a camera converted for astro and for infrared and all that kind of fun stuff. So I think at the time being, having them converted that way is probably the way you're going to have to go. I don't think we're going to have a camera that's by default out like that. Unfortunately, as much as I love astrophotography, and I know from talking with you, I know you like it as well. I don't know if there's enough of a market out there, but that's a good point, though. Is if there is a market out there, sound off. Let everybody know. Let's do one more question from the live chat here, and then I'm going to jump over to one of the other questions we had, which was actually photography based on using post focus. Let's see. From Ron, is date timestamp available on the S5 in video mode? That's a good question. Maybe, Jack, if you have an S5 and you're monitoring, maybe you can check. I honestly have not looked to see if the date and timestamp is available on the S5. I know it's on the S1H, but we can take a look at that. One last question from live chat for right now. Lux Shots S5 availability. We covered that before. If you are in the US, you should be getting them by the end of the month now. Albert, talk about the image app. If you're talking about the mobile app or the LUMIX Tether app for the computer, let me know in the comment. I'm going to jump over to the post-focus demonstration, and then when I'm done with that, we'll continue on with the image app once I know exactly which one you guys are asking about. And in the meantime, if you're asking about availabilities in other regions other than the US, unfortunately, we don't have that information on this stream since we only have info for the US markets right now, since Jack and I are based in the US. All right, let's see what we've got here. All right, so like I said, one of the other questions that we actually got a lot with the request was, how about doing post-focus? How does it work? What does it actually do? And how are you actually accessing this? So I'm working on the G100 right here, since I figure it's one of the more commonly used cameras for this kind of work. At least I know that's really where I've used it a lot. So basically with post-focus, what it's doing is it's going to be taking a video file and racking focus from near to far, essentially from near to far, and capturing images at all of the focus points that it confirms. So this gives you the ability to tap and change focus after you've taken the picture. So the creative uses of this are actually pretty interesting if you're someone that wants to get into doing some photo stacking, or if you're someone that's looking to do, you're not sure exactly where you want that photo to be focused. Now, the cool thing is this is using our 4K photo technology, which means if you're in a G9 or you're in one of the cameras that supports 6K photo, you can do this in the 6K capability as well, which would give you an 18 megapixel JPEG. In the camera like this, the G100, it's going to give you an 8.3 megapixel image. And it's really simple. All you're going to do is push down on the directional pad to open up the drive modes. And you'll scroll over to the icon that looks like a burst rate segment of images that also has that little flower and mountain in it. So the focus icons that we're used to seeing for years. Once you click on that, you'll see that you get an image that you're basically ready to work with. Now, from here, because I lit up my image a lot, I'm going to come in and let's set about an f2 aperture. Let's adjust my exposure compensation down because I left that on. And let's do this image here. So basically all you're going to do is half press the shutter. You'll see that it'll give you the beep that it's ready. Then you half press the shutter. That image is way too dark. So let's try this one again. So I'm going to up my ISO to, we'll go to 1600. So I'm going to half press the shutter, press the shutter button, and now what you'll see is you get all those little green boxes that are going to go over the image. What this does is this now allows me to take a look at the camera and go, okay, I really like that focus plane. I really like that focus plane. And you can select it after the fact. So all you'd have to do is just press the menu set button, save this image out, and cool, I've got an image that's focused at that range. I like where it was on the lens, so I'm going to press the menu set button again. And cool, it's focused at that range. The cool part that this offers is that I can tap FN1 here and go into auto merge and just click yes. Now what this does is this takes all of those images that were in that video file and it intelligently goes through and picks out what part of the image was in focus to stack them in camera. Now, is this going to be a perfect stack? Not always. It depends on the complexity of the scene that you're looking at. But the coolest thing is that you can take this video file that comes out of this and throw it into something like Helicon Focus, or at least that's the one that I've used in the past. And it will take all the stills out of that video file so that you can do a more complex stack that would take advantage of your computer's processing capabilities. So you have a number of capabilities with this. So this is a really straightforward, simple, easy way to get into stacking and into that kind of work. When you use lenses like what we've got, like the 10-25, and lenses that are designed to not focus breathe, it will become a big benefit because focus breathing is what can screw up stacking in some cases because your field of view changes. That's where it actually becomes critical for photographers to understand what focus breathing is. But now that this image is stacked, I can zoom in and say, okay, I now have an image that's focused from the LUMIX lens in the back, all the way into the S5 that I have in the middle there, all the way to my G95 that I have right here in the corner. So pretty simple, straightforward way to actually get into using some of the technologies that are in this camera. Let's see what the next questions are. There's the Starlight AF question. I know I saw that before. I have not been ignoring your question. I just couldn't remember who asked it, and didn't want to get that one wrong. But so yeah, Starlight AF. For photographers that are doing astrophotography or situations where you want to be able to photograph the stars, but obviously you can have some challenges finding your focus point, we have built into the cameras what's called Starlight AF. Now, what's cool is that this is nothing that you have to do in the camera. You don't have to activate it. You don't have to go into a special mode. You don't need to, adjust the camera at all to get into Starlight AF. Basically, how the system works, when you set your camera up, you're typically on a tripod for this because you're doing astro. You're photographing, you have the stars in the sky. You have pressed the shutter button either with your remote or if you're holding the camera. And the camera's going to attempt to autofocus. So in ultra low light like that, you have pinpoints of stars to focus on. So typically you have something to focus on. If the camera can't detect focus within its normal operating range, which I believe on the G9 is down to like -6 EV or something like that. I could be a little wrong on that one, but it's a really, really dark environment. When the lighting levels go below that, what you'll see is a box that basically fills in the center area, and the camera is going to drop into Starlight AF. What that will do is it's going to look for stars, look for those areas, and then it's going to automatically trigger to go into that mode to focus on the stars. In a lot of cases, you may be surprised that the camera may not actually have to drop into Starlight AF to get your focus. I've been using the cameras for probably around 6 or 7 years now. I haven't run into a situation where I've needed to have, where it's been dark enough that the camera drops into Starlight AF. It usually just works in its normal standard mode, but you can basically just set the camera up, half press the shutter, and it's going to drop into that mode automatically if you need it. Albert, so you guys were asking about the mobile app. Okay. So if some of you are aware, we have the LUMIX Sync app, which is the new version of our the new version of our mobile app. This works for the newer cameras, so all the S cameras, the G9, GH5, GH5S, anything that's on the newer platform. And I believe the G100 it also works with. Yeah. So what the app basically, you have a ton of different controls, and I actually would have connected my phone in to show the sync app, but I actually just didn't even think about it, so I don't have my little dongle thing for my iPhone to show you. But I'll try to describe it the best I can. The LUMIX Sync app, what it's going to give you the ability to do is really go in and control everything about the camera. So typically the first thing I suggest everybody does that has a camera that can connect via Bluetooth, load the app, go through the process, click the little question mark icon that's going to be up in the top left, and follow the camera registration for pairing process. What that will do is it's going to actually set up your Bluetooth and your Wi-Fi all in one go. So your Wi-Fi is going to be set up, your Bluetooth is automatically registered. It takes a lot of the headache out of the first time setup for your camera. Once you're done with that, you're going to have a couple of options to actually work with that app. You'll have the ability to use just the Bluetooth connection, which is going to give you the, depending on the camera you have, it's going to give you the ability to actually save out your camera settings to your phone. So if you're working in multiple, say, GH5s, set one camera up the way you want it, connect your phone via Bluetooth, save those camera settings out, and then all you have to do is connect to the other cameras, and you can load those settings onto your cameras. So it actually makes it really quick if you don't have the SD cards to swap through and do it that way. The other thing it allows you to do for photographers and even videographers is you have the ability to actually trigger start-stop recording. You have the ability to trigger your shutter as a normal standard, actually remote port. But you can also set it up as bulbs, so you just tap the screen, pull down, and now you're in a locked mode, so you can just let it run and run and run. The other really, really useful part about the mobile app is that you have full control over your camera. You have the ability to actually go through and change your ISO, change your white balance, change your aperture, change every single thing about the camera. If your camera has high resolution mode capabilities, you can trigger high resolution mode in the app. The only thing you can't do from the app is time-lapse photography. I don't know if there's a particular reason behind that, if it's just a limitation because of the connection, what's going on in the camera, plus the typical delay that you're going to have a little bit in controls on a mobile app. So there's a little bit of a challenge there with that, but it becomes, in my opinion, one of the most easy to use, straightforward platforms to work with on any camera out there. I hope that gave you guys a little bit. As far as updates go, I don't really know what kind of updates there would be, what would actually be requested from you guys. If you guys have things that you're requesting to be updated as far as the app goes, drop them in the comments here or in the comments after the video is posted on YouTube. We typically do watch all of this stuff for comments, like I said, that you guys are making, suggestions that you guys have about the cameras, to really be able to help us, figure out what do you guys want to see in the cameras. Let's see. What's the next question? Let's see. FC252 asks, what are the pros of mechanical shutter versus electronic shutter? Pros of electronic shutter is quiet and higher shutter speeds. So basically, this is going to come down to the environment you're shooting in and the need for a higher shutter speed in your general shooting. Yes, electronic shutters are much quieter. You have the ability, because it's just doing a scan of the sensor, to save out your image, so it is totally dead silent. Mechanical shutter, though, has a ton of benefits over electronic shutter in a number of environments. Electronic shutter does not allow you to use a flash because it's a scanning sensor. So currently, if I were to use this flash with an electronic shutter, one, it's just not going to let me use it. If I was able to make it work, which you can do with an off camera and a long enough shutter speed, you'll get banding because the sensor has to scan through. It's kind of like it's shooting out of sync. Mechanical shutter lets you use those flashes. It also lets you go into things like high-speed sync, which flashes like this do support, so you have the ability to do high-speed sync. Mechanical shutter typically also gives you At least in much older cameras, there used to be a bit of a bit depth difference between mechanical and electronic. That's no longer a thing. I can't remember the last time a camera came out that had a limitation like that, so you're perfectly going to be fine one way or another. And just in general, yeah, it's just, one or the other. If you're outdoors, super bright light, you want to shoot at f1.4 and the camera needs a 16,000th of a second shutter speed, electronic's probably going to be fine for you because it's a fast enough shutter speed. The big negative with electronic shutter is that there's two main negative issues. Rolling shutter is a higher potential with electronic shutter. Mechanical shutter, you're not going to have any instance of that. Electronic shutter, because it's scanning, if you're, say, on a bullet train, you're probably going to get a little bit of a skew. The other issue is in typically harder lighting scenarios. So cycling fluorescent lights, sodium vapor lights, that's where you can get that kind of discolored bar that scrolls through your screen. That's because of an electronic scan, and it's being out of sync with the lights that you're working with. So a couple of little differences there. Let's see what other questions we've got. VFX, thanks for answering that question. Yes, Sushi, we cover both photography and videography depending on the day, depending on the topics that we're covering. This is an AMA about photo and video, things that we've had tons of questions about. Let's see here. I think it's Arif. I'm new to Panasonic. I'm using the G9. How can you take black and white in RAW? Good question. So when you shoot RAW with a digital camera, you're not actually capturing any of the in-camera profiles that you shoot. So if you set the camera up to be, say, L monochrome D, when you load that file into something like Lightroom, it's going to convert to color. What you basically do to actually get around that, and actually that brings up a good segue, so I'm going to jump over here. So this is actually a really good segue for this, and we'll take maybe one or two more questions here. So this image, this was shot with the S1R, and this is, I'll go into the library here and show you guys, so I'm not full of it. This is the S1R with the 24-70 2.8. Actually, yeah, 24-70 2.8. There it is. So this image, originally I did shoot this image in RAW. I shot it in RAW with black and white because I really liked the L monochrome D look here. I have it tweaked a little bit myself. But you'll notice that by default, Adobe came in and changed it to Adobe Color. The cool thing is, for those that do still stick with Adobe, you have the ability to go into the settings. I actually can't remember where it is. I think it's in one of them. You do have the ability to go in and actually change it so that it will load the camera's default profile in. So that's made it a little bit better. But what you would do here is go into the Adobe where it says Profile and select the profile that's in here. You should see the monochrome D profile. So this was fairly early in the time, so not all the profiles were loaded in with Adobe here. But I can just click Camera L Monochrome. That converts it to the matched monochrome that's recorded in the S1R. And then I can make my adjustments for just the exposure, how I want the image to look, what kind of contrast do I want to throw on it, and just actually get all of that control into the image I want. So it hopefully helps some of that situation with shooting RAW in the camera and then not seeing the black and white that you've recorded when you get into your editing software. Let's see here. How are we doing on time? It's 2:04 here in good old Texas. We're going to take two more questions, and then we're actually going to wrap it for today. But let's see here. From Albert, does S-Series work with Godox flashes? Yes, it does. This is a Godox flash I have on here. We do have our LUMIX flashes, which internally support the high-speed sync and burst shooting. The Godox flashes and some of the others don't support certain things, but TTL and high-speed sync do work on those flashes. Let's see, the next question here. Enrique, is something like the Ninja useful for photographers? This one, it depends. If you're strictly a photographer, I really don't think it's going to give you a whole lot of benefit. Mainly because it's so designed for recording, for video. If you're starting to shoot and you're kind of a hybrid user where you're looking at both photo and video for some of your work, I'd say, yeah, definitely get a Ninja. Get some sort of recorder. They're going to help you for, obviously it's a larger screen. You get additional tools to those that may not be in your particular camera. It is a useful tool. It just depends on what your overall, look is, depending on what not look. And it just depends on what your actual requirements are. Are you just strictly photography, or are you starting to kind of get more into video? If you're just getting more into video, can be a good investment, but also look at lenses, look at lighting. Those can typically be maybe a little bit better of an investment to start with if you're perfectly cool with the codecs that you're working with in the camera. Let's see here. I know there was one question here about the 100 to 400. I think that came from Tom. Yeah, I was asking about if there's anything update with the 100 to 400. So at this time, I have no information about any kind of update or any improvements with the 100 to 400. So sorry, Tom. Don't have any new info for you. Let's see here. Maybe we'll take one last question. This will actually be one to end it with here. So from Amber Shore, picture and fine portrait and film. Will there be an update to the G9, or when is the GH6 coming out? So unfortunately, like I said, if you weren't in with the beginning of the stream, we don't have any information on future products. This is typically not the platform that you're going to see that kind of information during our weekly streams. It's just not the way to find it for this. But what you want to do is make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, follow the Instagram, Facebook, all the different platforms. If you're in the US, make sure you're following all the US channels. You'll get the information when and if there are things that do come out through those platforms. And as always, make sure that, like I said, you're following this channel, because we always do talk about new things, exciting things. We talk with filmmakers, we talk with videographers, photographers, general content creators about everything and anything that comes out in the market. Actually, one last question. I always keep saying that, one last question, but there is one last question there from Tutorials and Vlogs. When will the 24, 30, 50 primes be released? Soon-ish. We haven't given any more information than what you've seen in the S5 launch. So again, keep an ear to all the different platforms, your regional platforms, the global platform for LUMIX, and that's where you'll find all of that information. So with that, because we're about 10 minutes over. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know this was a very different kind of platform, different kind of stream than we've normally done for LUMIX Live. All the questions that you guys have had in the chat are awesome. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys jumping in there and actually taking time to comment. Give us your suggestions, give us your opinions, whether they're positive or negative opinions. I like seeing the comments. That's why we're doing these things. We want this communication with all of you. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, so I do apologize if we didn't get to your questions. But like I said, the goal is I kind of want to do these once a month. If we can get them in the schedule where the last week of every month is going to be this kind of platform where I show you a couple demonstration things, we have more of this kind of conversation. I think this could be a good area for everyone to just really chat. I saw a lot of conversations going back and forth between all of you in the chat. helping each other out. That's really what this community is about, making sure that all of us are supporting each other's content, helping each other out, and being able to really expand our understanding of photography, videography, and all things technology. Because let's face it, we're all gearheads. We all love gear. That's why we're watching a YouTube channel from a camera brand. So with that, again, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon on this video. It helps us out tremendously in making sure that we are staying relevant, that you guys are enjoying this content. It helps us to know that everyone's actually liking this. With that, make sure to tune in next Thursday at 2 p.m. We're going back to a bit of our normal stream style. We will have our guest, one of our ambassadors, on next week to talk about filmmaking. So make sure to join in there. And with that, as a reminder, these do get posted back on YouTube after we watch them or after they're streamed. So definitely check it out. If you guys want to continue the conversations, continue the questions, drop those questions and comments on the posted video, and we will see everybody next week. Thanks for watching, everybody.